My name is Grace Bellamy, and I am 31 years old. And 3 weeks before my wedding, the man I was going to marry stood in the kitchen of our expensive apartment and told me he had changed his mind. Not about the caterer, not about the seating chart, about me. He had already paid the deposit on a life with someone else, and he needed his ring back by Friday. I want to tell you the whole story, because I have learned something in the year since that night that I think a lot of you need to hear, especially those of you who have ever been made to feel like you were too small, too plain, too ordinary for the life you were living. I was made to feel that way for 4 years, and then a leaking roof and a quiet man and my dead mother's flower shop taught me what I had gotten completely, catastrophically wrong about love. This is that story. But before I start, let me ask you for something. If you are new here, take a second and subscribe, because these are the stories I make for people who are rebuilding, and I would love to have you along. And do me a small kindness. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight, and whether it is warm or cold outside your window, because I like to picture all of you out there in the dark, in all your different towns, listening. It means more than you know. Now let me take you back. 4 years ago, I was engaged to a man named Trent Ashford, and on paper, he was everything my mother had warned me to want. He was 36. He was a partner at a development firm in the city. He wore suits that cost more than my car, and when he walked into a restaurant, the staff stood up a little straighter. I met him when I was 26 and dazzled easily, and he chose me the way a certain kind of man chooses a watch, because it looked good on him, because it made a statement about the kind of man he was. I did not understand that at the time. At the time, I thought I had been chosen because I was special. Trent had a way of loving me that I mistook for love for a very long time. He loved to improve me. He paid for my teeth to be straightened and told me it was a gift. He bought me clothes in colors he preferred, and slowly the things I used to wear disappeared from my closet. He corrected the way I spoke in front of his colleagues, gently, with a hand on my back, and I learned to speak less. He had a sentence he used, and he used it so often that it stopped sounding like an insult and started sounding like a goal. He would look at me, a little disappointed, a little hopeful, and he would say, "You could be so much more, Grace. You could be so much more." I heard it before dinner parties. I heard it when I laughed too loud. I heard it the time I mentioned, at a fundraiser, that my mother ran a little flower shop in the town where I grew up. I watched his face do something quick and cold, and later in the car he said it. "You could be so much more than a florist's daughter, Grace." And God forgive me, I agreed with him. I was ashamed of the flower shop. I was ashamed of the smell of soil under my mother's fingernails, of the bucket of stems by the door, of the hand-painted sign my father made before he died. I had spent 4 years becoming a woman who was ashamed of the best people who ever loved her. That is the part I have to live with. I remember one night in particular, because it was the night I should have known and did not. It was a charity gala, black tie, the kind of evening where the price of a table could have paid my mother's rent for a year. A woman at our table, a partner's wife with diamonds the size of teeth, asked me what my family did. And before I could answer, Trent answered for me. He put his hand over mine on the table, and he smiled, and he said, "Grace's people are in agriculture. My mother sold peonies out of a bucket to teenagers buying corsages, and my father grew tomatoes in the lot behind the shop and gave half of them away. And to spare himself the embarrassment of the truth, the man I was going to marry called them agriculture. And the terrible thing, the thing I am ashamed of to this day, is that I felt grateful. I felt grateful that he had covered for me. I had been so thoroughly trained to see my own history as something that needed covering. I laughed too loud at something later that night. The real laugh, my mother's laugh. The one that comes up from the belly and does not ask permission. And in the car home, Trent was quiet for a long time. And then he said it, soft and disappointed. "You could be so much more, Grace, if you would just let me help you." And I apologized. I apologized for my own laugh. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I have had to. There was a night I apologized to a man for laughing the way my dead mother taught me to laugh. That is how far gone I was. If you have ever loved someone who made you smaller a little at a time, so slowly you did not notice you were disappearing, stay with me. I promise this story goes somewhere good. But we have to sit in the hard part first. The wedding was going to be enormous. 300 guests, most of whom I had never met, most of whom were there for Trent. His mother, Eleanor, planned all of it and consulted me on none of it. And when I tried to add my mother's favourite flower, ranunculus, to the arrangements, Eleanor smiled the way you smile at a child and said they were a little common for the venue. My mother had died 2 years before. I did not fight for the ranunculus. I have a lot of small surrenders like that in my history, and each one was a coin I paid to belong to a world that was never going to let me in. 21 days before the wedding, Trent came home late and did not take off his coat. I remember that. A man who is about to detonate your life keeps his coat on, like he already knows he is not staying. He stood in the kitchen, and he told me that he and I both knew this was not working, which was news to me, and that he had grown close to someone who understood his world in a way I never would. Her name was Vanessa. Her father was a senator. Her family owned a piece of the very development deal Trent had been chasing for 2 years. He did not say that last part. I found it out later. But I want you to hold on to it, because it matters. He asked for the ring back by Friday. He said it kindly, which was somehow worse. And then he said, one last time, the sentence, except this time he turned it into a gift, the way he turned everything into a gift. He said, "You could be so much more than this, Grace. I think leaving is the best thing I could do for you." He truly believed he was doing me a favor. That is the kind of man he was. He could set your house on fire and hand you the match like a present. I gave the ring back on Thursday. I moved out on Saturday. And with nowhere else on this earth to go, I drove 4 hours north to Millbrook, the town I had spent a decade trying to escape, to the little apartment above the little flower shop that my mother had left me and that I had been too ashamed to even visit. The shop was dying. I need you to understand how dying. My mother, Colleen, had run Bellamy's Flowers on Meridian Street for 30 years, and after she passed, I had paid a manager to keep it limping along because I could not bear to sell it and could not bear to look at it. The manager had quit 8 months before I arrived. The windows were grey with dust. The walk-in cooler had a slow leak. There was a stack of past due notices on the counter that reached higher than the register. And there was a hole in the roof over the back room, right above the spot where my mother used to sit and wrap bouquets. And every time it rained, water came through and pooled on her old work table like the building itself was grieving. I sat down at that wet table on my first night home, 30 years old, jilted, jobless, ashamed. And I cried the way you cry when you have run out of the strength to hold it in. I want you to understand what that shop meant, so you understand what it cost me to have been ashamed of it. My mother built Bellamy's from nothing. She started it the year I was born, with a walk-in cooler my father bought second-hand and rewired himself, and a hand-painted sign he made in the garage that said, "Bellamy's Flowers," in letters that leaned a little to the right because he painted them with a broken wrist and would not wait to heal. For 30 years, That shop was the heart of Meridian Street. My mother did the flowers for every wedding, every funeral, every prom, every apology and anniversary and brand new baby in a town of 4,000 people. She knew everyone's story because she supplied the flowers for all of it. When old Mr. Petrie's wife died, my mother did the arrangement for free and sat with him at the service. When the Hollis girl got married with no money to speak of, my mother filled the church with peonies and called it a sample order. That was who she was. She did not run a business. She ran a 30-year act of love with a cash register attached, and I had been too ashamed of it to visit her grave more than twice. I sat at her work table in the dark, and the rain came through the roof, and I understood, finally, exactly what I had traded away, and for what, and for whom. That is exactly how Sam Cavanaugh found me. I should tell you about Sam. Sam ran the hardware store next door, Cavanaugh and Son, except there was no son and no father anymore, just Sam. We had gone to high school together. More than that, if I am honest, and it took me a long time to be honest about this. When we were 17, Sam Cavanaugh was the boy who walked me home, the boy who carried my books, the boy who kissed me once under the awning of that very flower shop while my mother pretended not to watch through the window. And when I was 18, I left him. I left him for college and the city and the big life, and I did it carelessly, the way you can only be careless when you are 18 and you think love is a thing that will keep showing up forever, like buses. Sam stayed. His father got sick that same year, and Sam stayed to run the store and care for him. And he never left Millbrook, not once, not for anything. He married a woman named Emily, a kind woman I never met, and they had a little girl. And then Emily got sick too, and 3 years before I came home, Sam buried his wife and became a single father to a daughter named Lily. He had lost more than anyone I knew, and here is the thing about Sam. It had not made him bitter. It had made him gentle. Loss does one or the other to a person, I have found. It had made Sam Cavanaugh the gentlest man in the state of my acquaintance. I have to tell you about the summer we were 17, because it is the ghost that sits under this whole story. Sam and I spent that entire summer together. He worked mornings at his father's store, and I worked afternoons at my mother's, and in the evenings we would sit on the loading dock behind the shops with our feet hanging over the alley, and we would talk about everything and nothing until the streetlights came on. He never tried to be more than he was with me. He was going to take over the hardware store, he said, and he was going to be good to people, and he was going to live a small, honest life in a small, honest town, and he said all of it without a trace of apology, like a small, honest life was a thing worth wanting. And I remember thinking, with all the arrogance of 18, that I wanted more than that I was meant for bigger things than a boy who wanted to sell nails and screws on Meridian Street forever. So I left. I got into a school 4 hours south, and I packed my mother's station wagon, and I told Sam we should keep it casual, see other people, no promises, and I watched his face take the blow and stay kind through it. And then I drove away, and I did not look back. Not once. For 13 years. He wrote me 2 letters that first autumn. I did not answer them. I was too busy becoming someone who could be so much more. I have those letters still. I found them in a box when I moved home. I read them at that wet work table, and I understood that at 18 I had held the real thing in my hands and set it down to go chase the counterfeit. And I had spent my entire adult life paying for the trade without even knowing I had made it. He knocked on the glass that first night. He had seen my car, seen the light on. He did not ask why I was crying. He just looked at the puddle on the table and the hole in the roof, and he said, "That has been letting go for a while now. I have got a tarp in the truck." And he went and got a tarp. And in the rain, in the dark, without being asked, A man I had abandoned 13 years earlier climbed onto my roof and covered the hole so my mother's work table would stay dry. Then he came down, and he did not linger, and he did not make me thank him. He just said, "Welcome home, Gracie." Nobody had called me Gracie in 13 years. And he left. I want to pause here, because I think some of you already feel where this is going, and I think some of you have a Sam in your own past, a person you left carelessly who never once made you pay for it. If you do, tell me about them in the comments. And if this story is finding you at a moment when you are sitting in the wreckage of something, wondering if you are too much of a mess to be loved, please stay to the end, because I was a mess, and this is the story of being loved anyway. The next morning, Sam was on my roof at 7 a.m. with a ladder and a bundle of shingles. I went out in my mother's old cardigan and asked him what he thought he was doing, and he said, without looking down, "Fixing your roof." It is a 2-hour job. I would have done it years ago, but the manager never let me up here. I told him I could not pay him. I told him I could barely pay the electric bill. And Sam Cavanaugh looked down at me from that ladder with an expression I did not have a name for yet. And he said, "I did not ask you to pay me, Grace." Then he went back to hammering. That was the beginning of the slow way. And the slow way is what I want to tell you about, because the slow way is the whole point of this story. Sam did not sweep in and rescue me. That is not who he was, and honestly, I would not have let him. What Sam did was smaller and 1,000 times bigger than rescue. He showed up. He fixed the cooler that leaked and would not take money for the part. When I was too proud to ask for help pricing out a new sign, he mentioned casually that his cousin did vinyl lettering and owed him a favor. When Lily had a school project about local businesses, Sam brought her by the shop to interview me. And that 7-year-old girl with her father's serious eyes asked me why flowers made people happy, and I did not have an answer. And she said, "I think it is because somebody had to grow them just for you." I wrote that down. I put it on a card in the window. It sold more bouquets than any sale I ever ran. Here is what I started to notice about Sam, and it took me weeks, because I had been trained by an expert to look for the wrong things. Sam never once told me I could be more than I was. Not once. When I mentioned, embarrassed, that I only had a high school understanding of running a business, he did not offer to improve me. He said, "Your mother ran this place for 30 years on instinct and kindness, and the whole town loved her for it. You have got the same instincts. Trust them." When I wore my mother's old cardigan with the paint stains, because it was the only thing that made me feel close to her, Trent would have suggested I change. Sam said it looked like her. He said it like it was the finest thing a piece of clothing could be. Do you see the difference? It took me 31 years and 2 men to see it. One man loved me for who I might become if I let him carve away everything I was. The other man loved me for who I already was, dirt under the nails and paint on the cardigan and all. One man handed me a sentence that made me smaller. The other handed me a tarp in the rain and asked for nothing. There was a saying my mother had. She said it to me the summer I was 17, the summer of Sam, when I asked her how you were supposed to know if a boy was the right one. She wiped her hands on her apron, and she looked out the window at Sam Cavanaugh sweeping the sidewalk in front of his father's store, and she said, "The right one doesn't dazzle you, honey. Any fool can dazzle you for a season. The right one waters you. You want to find the one who is still there, quietly making sure you have got what you need to grow, long after the dazzle wears off. The right one waters you." I had heard her say it 100 times, and I had run off and married the dazzle anyway. It took a leaking roof to bring me home to the water. Let me tell you about the town, because the town is part of how I healed, and I had spent 13 years too embarrassed to admit I missed it. Millbrook is the kind of place where the woman at the diner remembers how you take your coffee after one visit. Word got around fast that Colleen's girl had come home to save the shop, and the town did what small towns do, which is show up in 100 small, ordinary ways that add up to being carried. Mrs. Petrie, whose husband my mother had comforted at his wife's funeral, started ordering a fresh arrangement every single week for her front hall, and I know for a fact she did not need one. The high school called and asked if I would do the homecoming flowers, the way my mother always had. The diner put a stack of my cards by the register. Nobody made a fundraiser of it. Nobody needed to be thanked. They just quietly decided that this shop was not going to die on their watch, the way you decide to hold up something heavy for someone whose arms have given out. I had spent 4 years trying to belong to a world of 300 strangers at a wedding, and I had forgotten that I already belonged to a world of 4,000 people who knew my mother's name. And through all of it, there was Sam, not rushing, never rushing. On Tuesdays, he would come by on his lunch break and eat his sandwich on my step and talk to me about nothing while I worked, and I started, without deciding to, saving up small things during the week to tell him on Tuesday. One afternoon, a thunderstorm knocked the power out on the whole block, and Sam appeared in the doorway with 2 camping lanterns and a thermos of coffee, and we sat in my darkened shop surrounded by buckets of flowers in the lantern light. And he told me about Emily, about the good years and the hard end. He told it plainly, without self-pity. And when he was done, he said something I have thought about more times than I can count. He said, "I am not telling you this to be sad. I am telling you because you have been walking around like your history is something to apologize for. And I wanted you to know that the good parts and the broken parts are the same story. You do not get to keep one without the other. The good parts and the broken parts are the same story." Nobody had ever handed me permission like that before. Lily adopted me somewhere in there, quietly, the way her father did things. She started coming by after school 2 or 3 days a week, dropping her backpack behind the counter, telling me about her day while she sorted stems by colour. She was 7, going on 70, that child, serious and observant, and she watched me the way children watch you when they are deciding whether you are safe. One day she asked me, out of nowhere, whether I had a mum, and I said I used to, and she nodded, very grown up about it, and said, "Me too." And then she took my hand, just for a second, and went right back to sorting the yellow flowers into the yellow bucket, and I had to go into the back room so she would not see me cry. I was not just falling for a man. I was falling into a family, one careful Tuesday at a time, and it was nothing like being dazzled. It was like coming in from the cold so slowly that you do not notice you have stopped shivering until the warmth is already in your hands. By the middle of that summer, the shop was breathing again, not thriving, but breathing. And a strange thing had started happening that I could not explain. Every Friday, a standing order came in, a large one, the biggest order the shop got all week. 4 dozen mixed stems, always with ranunculus in them, my mother's flower, to be picked up under the name Smith. Cash, left in an envelope. Whoever it was never came in while I was there. That Friday order was, some weeks, the only thing that kept me from missing a payment. For 3 months, an anonymous person named Smith bought 4 dozen flowers a week and quietly kept my mother's shop alive, and I had no idea who it was. I want to stop here for just a moment. If this story is meaning something to you tonight, do me a favor and share it with one person who needs to be reminded that quiet love is still love. It might be the realest thing they hear all week. Now let me tell you how it all came apart, and then how it came together. In September, Trent came back. But I have to tell you what happened the week before he did, because the timing is almost cruel. and because it is the moment I let myself hope. The town held its end of summer street fair on Meridian, the way it does every Labor Day, and I set up a little stand in front of the shop, single stems for $1, my mother's old tradition. Sam ran the ring toss booth next door for the kids, and Lily spent the whole afternoon shuttling between us. And at some point I looked up from wrapping a bunch of zinnias, and I caught Sam watching me across the crowded street with an expression he did not have time to hide, and something in my chest that had been clenched for 4 years finally let go. That night, after we broke down the booths, Sam walked me to my door, the way he had when we were 17, under the very awning where he kissed me a lifetime ago. And we stood there, and he did not kiss me. He looked at me for a long moment, and he said, "I am not going to do anything you might regret while you are still healing from him. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, you will not have to wonder how I feel. You have known how I feel since we were kids." And then he said goodnight, and he walked home, and I stood under that awning with my heart going like a girl's, and I thought, there he is. There is the water. I am finally ready to grow toward the water. And then, 3 days later, before I could do a single thing about it, Trent came back. I looked up from the counter one afternoon, and there he was, filling my mother's doorway in a suit that cost more than my monthly revenue, holding 24 roses that he had, I am certain, bought at a grocery store on the highway. He smiled the smile that used to make my knees forget their job. He said he had made a terrible mistake. He said Vanessa had been a distraction, that he had realized what he threw away, that he wanted me back. He got down on one knee, right there on the floor my mother mopped for 30 years, and he produced the same ring I had handed back in a different life, and he said, "Come home, Grace. You were never meant for a town like this. You could be so much more." There it was, the sentence. And here is the thing. A year earlier, that sentence had been the ceiling of my whole world. Now it just sounded like a man describing a house he wanted to buy, because I had spent a summer with someone who never once wanted me to be more than I was, and it turns out that when you have tasted being loved as you are, you lose your appetite for being loved as a project. I did not say yes, but I did not say no either, not right away, and I am not proud of that. The old training runs deep. Part of me, the small, ashamed part that Trent had spent 4 years building brick by brick, whispered that this was my chance to go back to the big life, the easy life, the life where the roof did not leak and nobody in agriculture ever had to be explained. I told him I needed to think. He said he would take me to dinner Friday to talk about it. And he left his grocery store roses on my counter, and they were dead by Wednesday, which I have never stopped finding funny. I did not sleep much that week. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think the honest part is the useful part. It would be a prettier story if I told you I laughed in his face and never wavered. But I wavered. I sat up at that work table at 2 a.m, and I let myself imagine going back. And the terrible truth is that the fantasy was not even about loving him. It was about being chosen by someone the world admired. It was about walking into a room and having the staff stand up straighter. Trent had trained me so well that even after everything, a part of me still measured my own worth by how much a powerful man wanted me. That is what that kind of love does. It does not just break your heart. It rewrites the instrument you use to measure your own life. And it takes a long time, and a lot of quiet Tuesdays, to learn to read the dial again. It was Lily who cracked it open. Sweet, serious Lily, 7 years old. She came into the shop after school that week, like she often did, and she saw Trent's card propped by the register, and she read it slowly, and she looked up at me with her father's eyes, and she asked, "Is that man going to take you back to the city?" And I said I did not know. And Lily was quiet for a while, arranging the loose stems in the bucket the way I had taught her. And then she said, without looking up, "My dad buys you flowers every week. He thinks I don't know. He does it under a fake name because he doesn't want you to feel like you owe him." Smith. Sam was Smith. For 3 months, the man who ran the hardware store on a razor-thin margin, the widower raising a little girl alone, had been quietly spending money he did not have to buy 4 dozen flowers a week, always with my mother's ranunculus in them, and leaving them under a false name so that I would never feel indebted, so that I would never feel watered against my will, so that I would be free to choose whatever I chose without owing him a thing. He had kept my mother's shop alive and made sure I never knew, because knowing might have trapped me. And the last thing Sam Cavanaugh would ever do is trap a person into loving him. That, right there, is the difference between the two men. And it is the whole reason I am telling you this story. Trent came back with 2 dozen roses he wanted me to see, on his knee, in front of a witness. A grand gesture designed to be witnessed and rewarded. Sam had been giving 4 dozen flowers a week for months and had hidden every single one. A quiet gift designed never to be seen at all. One man performs love, the other man practices it. And I had spent my whole life until that moment unable to tell them apart. I found out the rest that same week, and it turned my stomach. My friend Dana, who worked at the county clerk's office, mentioned in passing over coffee that a development firm had been quietly buying up the whole east side of Meridian Street, the entire block, for some big mixed-use project, condos over retail, the kind of thing that erases a street like ours and puts up a version of it with none of the people in it. Every storefront had sold except one. Mine. My mother's shop was the lone holdout that was blocking the deal, and a stalled deal on a full block bleeds money by the day. I did not think much of it until Dana said the name of the firm, almost as an afterthought, reaching for the cream. Ashford Development. I put my coffee down very carefully so I would not drop it. Ashford. Trent's firm. Trent had not driven 4 hours north to win back my heart. He had run the numbers, the way he ran everything, and he had realized that the cheapest possible way to unlock a multi-million-dollar development was not to buy out the stubborn holdout. It was to marry her. A ring costs less than a lawsuit. A wife who owns the parcel signs whatever you put in front of her. You could be so much more, Grace. He meant it as literally as a man can mean anything. He needed me to be more than a florist. He needed me to be a signature on a deed. I did go to that dinner on Friday. I want you to know I went. I put on a dress, and I let Trent order the expensive wine, and I let him talk for an hour about our future, the penthouse, the travel, the life we would have. He was good at it. I will give him that. He painted a beautiful picture, and 4 years ago it would have worked. And part of the reason I went was to find out for certain whether it still would. It did not. I sat there, and I watched his mouth move, and I realized I was not tempted anymore. I was just sad. The way you are sad looking at a photograph of a place you used to think was the whole world. And when he was finished, I set down my glass, and I asked him one question. I asked him what my mother's favorite flower was. 4 years engaged. 2 years since her funeral, which he attended in a very nice suit. He did not know. He frowned, and he took a guess. And he guessed roses, because roses are what a man like Trent thinks flowers are. And I smiled, and I told him it was ranunculus. And I told him that a man who had been buying them for me every Friday for 3 months, 4 dozen at a time, under a fake name, spending money he did not have, so that I would never once feel that I owed him anything, had known the answer since he was 17 years old. Trent did not understand. I watched him not understand it, watched the words go past him like weather, because a man who has only ever performed love cannot recognize the real thing, even when you describe it to his face. And then I told Trent that I was keeping the shop, and I was keeping myself, and that he could tell his firm the holdout was not for sale at any price, including the price of my entire life. And I stood up, and I left him with the check, which I have also never stopped finding funny. I drove home, and I did not go to my apartment. I drove to the little house on Cedar Lane, where Sam Kavanagh was doing the dishes with his daughter, and I knocked on the door. And when he opened it, wiping his hands on a towel, looking surprised and hopeful and terrified all at once, I said the only thing worth saying. I said, "You have been buying me flowers under a fake name." He went red to his ears. He started to apologize, and I stopped him. And I said, "My mother told me to marry the one who waters me. It took me 13 years and a leaking roof to come home to you. I am so sorry it took me so long." He did not say anything clever. Sam never did. He just stepped forward and put his arms around me, right there in the doorway, with Lily peeking around his hip, grinning like she had planned the whole thing, which I have since learned she more or less had. And for the first time in 4 years, nobody wanted me to be more than I was. I was already, exactly, enough. That was a year ago. I want to tell you where we are now, because I know some of you need to hear that the good ending is real. I still run Bellamy's Flowers on Meridian Street. The block never got developed, because the holdout never sold, and the town rallied around us in a way that still makes me cry. And the shop is not just breathing now, it is thriving. Turns out a florist who genuinely loves her town, in a cardigan with paint stains, selling flowers somebody grew just for you, is exactly the kind of business people drive across 3 counties to support. My mother was right about instinct and kindness. She was right about everything. Sam and I are getting married in the spring. Small wedding. 50 people, all of whom we actually know, in the little church my mother filled with peonies for strangers for 30 years. Lily is my flower girl, and she has informed me, very seriously, that the arrangements will feature ranunculus, my mother's flower, because somebody has to grow them just for you. I did not have to fight anyone for those flowers. Nobody called them common. Nobody suggested I could do better. That is how you know. The absence of that particular ache, the ache of being not quite enough, is a thing I notice every single day, the way you notice a headache is gone. I moved my things into the little house on Cedar Lane over the winter. There is paint on my cardigan most days and dirt under my nails most nights, and I have never once been asked to be anything other than exactly what I am. Lily calls me Grace still, not Mom, and we decided together that is right for now. And one evening she fell asleep against my shoulder on the couch, and Sam looked over at the two of us and did not say anything at all. And that silence held more love in it than 4 years of a man telling me what I could become. I think about my mother a lot in that house. I think she would have liked Sam enormously. I think she knew, that summer we were 17, watching him sweep the sidewalk. I think she was trying to tell me, the right one waters you. She handed me the whole map when I was a girl, and it only took me 13 years and a leaking roof to learn to read it. I do not hate Trent anymore. I do not think about him much at all, which is its own kind of freedom. Last I heard, the deal fell through, and Vanessa's family found a better connected partner, and Trent learned, I hope, that you cannot build a life on people you only value for what they can sign. I would tell him it worked out for the best, that his leaving was the finest gift he ever gave me, but he would only hear it as agreement that I could be so much more. And the beautiful thing, the thing that took me 31 years to learn, is that I do not want to be more. I want to be exactly this: a florist, a soon-to-be wife, a woman who finally knows the difference between being dazzled and being watered. So here is what a dying flower shop and a leaking roof taught me, and it is what I want to leave with you tonight. The love that performs for an audience is not the love that will hold you at 3 in the morning when the audience has gone home. Look for the quiet one. Look for the one who fixes the roof and asks for nothing. Look for the one who has been watering you all along under a fake name, hoping only that you grow, whether or not you ever grow toward him. And if you have already found that person, do not do what I did. Do not spend 13 years chasing the dazzle. Go home to the water. That is my story. A jilted bride, a hole in the roof, 4 dozen flowers a week under a fake name, and the gentlest man in the state, who loved me as I was until I finally learned to do the same. If this reached you tonight, tell me in the comments about the quiet love in your life, the one who waters you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because there are more of these to come, and I am so glad you are here. I will see you in the next one.